Welcome to Anews. I'm Umar Taslim and you're watching Turkey's Diplomacy. The Middle East has been shaken by Israel's airstrike in Doha, an attack condemned by Turkey and much of the Arab world as a flagrant violation of sovereignty. The strike has deepened regional rifts, strained U.S. credibility, and even exposed tensions between Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu. With Gaza ceasefire talks now derailed, more than 64,000 Palestinians killed, and the UN General Assembly set to convene without a Palestinian delegation, the crisis is intensifying. From volatile oil markets to NATO divisions, from Japan's political upheaval to Nepal's deadly protests, and from the SCO's bid for financial independence to Trump's controversial immigration raids, global fault lines are widening and their implications will shape the weeks ahead. Joining me on the program today to discuss these issues are Dr. Shuai Nilhan Achikalan from the Haji Bayramville University and Laurent Lecault, founder of the Macro Butler.
Israel attempted to kill the political leaders of Hamas with a Tuesday airstrike in Qatar. In the days since, the strike has drawn condemnation from Saudi Arabia, Japan, the European Union, and others. U.S. President Donald Trump voiced disapproval about the strike later on Tuesday.
I'm not thrilled about the whole situation. It's not a good situation.
Trump said that while he thought hitting Hamas was a worthy goal, he felt, quote, very badly that the attack took place in the Gulf Arab state, a major non-NATO ally of Washington. He said he would be giving a full statement on the issue on Wednesday. The airstrike took place shortly after Hamas's armed wing claimed responsibility for a shooting on Monday that killed 6 people at a bus stop on the outskirts of Jerusalem. While Israel defended its attacks as being justified, Qatar said Israel was treacherous and engaged in state terrorism. Qatar's prime minister said the airstrikes threatened to derail the peace talks Qatar has been mediating between Hamas and Israel. He also said that Qatar would take all necessary measures to respond to the attack. Hamas said 5 of its members had been killed, including the son of Hamas's exiled Gaza chief and top negotiator Khalil al-Hayya. However, it said Israel had failed in what Hamas called an attempt to assassinate the group's ceasefire negotiation team. A person briefed on the matter told Reuters that Israel is still gathering information on the strike and is yet to determine whether any Hamas officials or leaders were killed. 2 U.S. officials that spoke to Reuters on condition of anonymity said Israel notified the U.S. military shortly before the strike, but there was no coordination with or approval from Washington. Trump said he directed his envoy Steve Witkoff to warn Qatar the attack was coming. However, Qatar contradicted those comments, saying that reports that it got a heads up before the attack were false, and that the phone call from a U.S. official came after the strikes had begun.
Israel's attack in Qatar threatens to upend both negotiations over a ceasefire in Gaza and Israel's efforts to reach out to Gulf Arab states.
Qatar has received a lot of regional support since Israel targeted Hamas leadership here, but among those who are really leaning in are Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, and that's surprising, particularly since during the years in the first administration of U.S. President Donald Trump, those 2 countries had an economic boycott of Doha over a political dispute. Now we've seen the leader of the United Arab Emirates, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, as well as the Crown Prince of Dubai, who is also the country's defense minister, come to Qatar to signal their support. We've also seen the Saudis repeatedly call here, offering their support as well. And that really bodes poorly for Israel at this moment. Israel had been trying to build on a diplomatic recognition deal it had with the UAE to try to include Saudi Arabia as well. But this attack likely has put that deep into the cold. And the UAE already is warning Israel that their comments about potentially annexing the West Bank means that that deal is now in jeopardy as well. So all this put together shows just how tense the moment is here, just how far Israel has stepped away from the success it had with that diplomatic deal 5 years ago, and the signs that tensions over the war are going to continue in this region as they have for nearly 2 years.
Welcome back to the program. Joining us in the first half of the program is Dr. Shway Nilhan Açıkalan from the Hacı Bayram Veli University in Ankara. Dr. Shway, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Umar.
Dr. Shway, we all know what happened over the past few days. Israel yet again attacked another sovereign country. Qatar was the target this time around. Hamas leadership was targeted. Fortunately, the Hamas leaders, the top leaders, were not killed, were not injured. But unfortunately, Khalil al-Hayya's son was killed in that attack. Shway, firstly, I want to start with Turkey's reaction. How has Turkey reacted to this attack in Doha?
Thank you very much, Umar. Yes, we have been going through a very interesting days, not only in the region, but in the global scale. Of course, Turkey has negatively reacted to this attack because Turkey has a clear position in case of the foreign policy making regarding the regional security. And since the 7th of October, Turkey has been standing against the Israelis' aggression attitudes towards not only to Palestine, but also other regional countries. We see the same reaction and even much more harsh way in this time towards the Qataris attack by the Israelis, because Turkey clearly says that these kind of the attacks and the motivation of the Israel unfortunately didn't bring any peace attempts to the region, but even it brings just the instability and, of course, the more chaos for the region, and there is no hope and the light of the tunnel.
Dr. Shway, how will these attacks impact America's global image? But, I want to focus on the Middle East and Europe, because we know the reaction globally as well. How is this going to change America's image in the Middle East?
I think it is one of the important points that and we will see the much more long-term consequences after this attack, because if you remember that a few days just before the attack, the President Trump says that we need to correct, or we need to basically save the Israeli image, and that's why we need to make the ceasefire as soon as possible. However, this last attack is totally different from the previous attacks of the Israel in the region, because Qatar is one of the biggest allies of the United States in terms of the security. If you look over the Qatar map, you can easily see that one of the biggest American air base was located in the Qatar, not only in the region, but in terms of the compared to the other air base in the global level. Also, you will see another very big air base, basically, that located in Qatar by the British United Kingdom. So it's clearly seen that the Qatar is the exception within the region. So in this case, the attacking by the Israel to Qatar shows that, unfortunately, Americans turns to be an untrustable partner when it comes to the guaranteeing the securities, because in the last Trump tour as well, there is a clear agreement between the Qatari government and the United States, and they promised to make investments and also buying a different military equipment from the United States to having the security umbrella by the United States. And unfortunately, Americans' image right now has been fallen in the Middle East, not only as the trustable security alliance, but also in terms of the mediation, because everyone knows that the mediation and the negotiation process has been held in the Qatar in many times, and even the Americans also allow the negotiation desk was established in Qatar. So in two main dimensions, unfortunately, American image has been destroyed, not only in Qatar, we will see in the long term, also in the Gulf countries in together.
Dr. Shway, over the past few years, we've seen how Qatar has been a safe haven for negotiations. It hosted the Taliban, it hosted Hamas, it's currently hosting Hamas as well. And when we look at the events from the beginning of this year, we saw Trump visiting the Middle East. He went to the UAE, he went to Saudi Arabia, he went to Qatar. The Qataris gave them a new airplane, new Air Force One, and then they signed deals worth over $1 trillion as well. Would you agree with me when I say that the United States has betrayed Qatar?
Umar, I think some point you are right, because we haven't known that the technical details of this attack. There are still scenarios, and it's obvious that the President Trump is escaping to make any public statement regarding the technical details of the attacks. One scenario clearly shows that the Israeli jet fighters has been using the Saudi Arabia airspace, as well as the British some air forces has been helping to fueling the Israelis air power. In case of this, the scenario is real. This is one problem for not only the Americans but also the UK as well. And the second scenario, you also know that there are some information says that Americans learned the attack late, because they used also American intelligence, but Donald Trump doesn't know this the reality. This is also another, I think, the problematic. There is a clear betrayal by the Americans to the Qatari government, and it's not the betrayal for the short term, because the Americans and the Qataris security agreement or mutual understanding of the agreement is totally long term, as you said, that because it's included the investments and the mutual visits just enriched this year, created an undeniable breaking point in the Qataris and American relations.
Dr. Choi, I want to focus on the Abraham Accords now, because obviously there is going to be a fallout in the region. And in the Abraham Accords, we still have the UAE, there's Bahrain, there's Morocco. I want to focus on how, this attack will impact the Abraham Accords. Do you think that the UAE would try to withdraw? But I personally don't think that the UAE will withdraw, because when Iran attacked Israel, the UAE sent humanitarian aid and it was helping the Israelis. So how will the UAE, how will the Abraham Accords take shape in the wake of these attacks?
Well, just for the small reminder, the Abraham Accords has been basically was signed in the first Trump area in the first presidency time, and after the 7th of October, Abraham Accords is partially basically seems to be held by the Gulf countries. But especially after this attack, I think that not only the Abraham Accords, but of course the attitude of the Netanyahu and the announcement of the directly, he says that we targeted to Qatar. And yesterday, he clearly says that if some other Gulf countries will willingness to host the Hamas officials, we will also target them. It's a clear threat by the Israel to the Gulf countries. So it's not to see a realistic perspective to realizing the Abraham Accords in the long term, but it's also important to see that how the Gulf countries will react in these attacks regarding not only the Abraham Accords, but also clearly they said that we will give you the answer to this attack, and we are considering the different alternatives, and the alternatives, which one should be chosen by the Gulf countries, will also determine the future of the Abraham Accords.
Dr. Choi, there's a very interesting situation that's developing. Over the past few days, I was watching a statement made by Danny Danon, who is Israel's UN envoy. He said that we don't always act in the interests of the United States. You have also mentioned that all the details are not clear yet. So do you think that there are tensions, and tensions are increasing between Trump and Netanyahu?
I think their personal relations are already in severe tensions. We saw also in the second visit of the Netanyahu to White House in last month. And I think the Netanyahu time to time seriously keeping that policy to put Donald Trump and the American in a tough situation, not only in the region, but in general sense, also the relations between the other European countries regarding the Gaza issues. So it's not surprising, because the Netanyahu has been showing he's keeping his interest to keep in the power while bombing the regional countries. Even in the 72 hours, Israel basically bombed more than 5 countries in the region, just only to legitimizing their conceptualization of keeping the security of Israel. And unfortunately, if the Americans keep the supporting position of the American government towards the Israeli, I think this reality won't change, and it's normal to expect the Netanyahu's or the Israeli government can bomb anywhere else in the Gulf countries or some other American allies.
Dr. Choi, when the headquarters were bombed by Israel, negotiations over the Gaza ceasefire were ongoing. Do you believe that, there is a chance for a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip right now, or is it extremely non-existent at this point?
Umar, it is not easy to say because after the attack, we don't know about how the ceasefire negotiations will going on and which country will host the negotiation process. Because as we know that just before the attack, the Israeli sides and the Hamas side seems to be ready to negotiate in more close manner to the ceasefire. But I think in upcoming days it will be much more clear to see that will there be negotiation for ceasefire or not, because it will be also critical for the Gaza humanitarian situation.
Dr. Choi, before I let you go, my final question to you is, obviously the United Nations General Assembly is kicking off on the 22nd of September. How are you analyzing this summit? Do you think we will have any chance for peace, or we'll see once again countries fighting each other, world leaders criticizing each other? Do you think that there is a chance for peace at this year's summit?
Before your question, I was thinking the same, because it's also related with the ceasefire situation, Umar. There is an expectancy to see that more than four countries will recognize the Palestine. But at the same time, we all know that 2 weeks ago, the Israeli government decided to make the E1 way to cut off the Palestine, basically the connection between the different parts. So it's also endangered that, that the four criteria of the United Nations being the state. So Palestine seems to be right now in a very tough situation after the Israelis' decision of the E1 way and the cutting of the related parts of the Palestine. But I'm expecting to see the new countries will recognize the Palestine, but the situation will be important how to determine the role of the Hamas and, of course, the Palestinian Authority, who will be the part of the negotiation process in the ceasefire. So in this case, I can say that, of course, it's a positive development to see the new countries will recognize the Palestine, but the point and the important question, how it will affect the ceasefire process and how they recognize the Palestine in the detailed case.
Dr. Shwai Nilhan Achikalan, it was a pleasure listening to your analysis. Thank you so much for being on the program today.
Thank you, Umar.
Oil prices edged higher midweek as geopolitical flare-ups and fresh U.S. tariff threats injected new uncertainty into energy markets.
Oil prices rose midweek as geopolitical tensions and United States trade demands added pressure to energy markets. The gains followed an attack in the Gulf that heightened supply fears and coincided with Washington's calls for tariffs targeting buyers of Russian crude. Analysts noted that the move drove a short-term risk premium into prices, though concerns about a wider supply crunch remained limited. Trading initially spiked after the incident but eased once assurances came that the conflict would not expand beyond its borders and supplies were unaffected. Market watchers also pointed to skepticism about Washington's tariff threats, suggesting the lack of concrete action leaves crude exposed to further weakness. Expectations of a United States interest rate cut next week offered some support by signaling a potential boost in demand. Still, the global supply outlook weighed heavily, with rising inventories and planned production increases keeping downward pressure on prices.
Airplanes avoided the Polish airspace on Wednesday after the NATO member country shot down Russian drones that violated its airspace.
Poland scrambled its own and NATO air defenses to shoot down drones in its airspace after a Russian air attack on Ukraine, marking a first time that Warsaw has got involved in the war in its neighboring nation, as it called the violation an act of aggression. Flight Radar 24 tracking data showed airplanes avoiding the Warsaw region in the early morning of Wednesday, after Chopin Airport in Warsaw announced that its airspace was closed due to military actions. Tracking data also showed a Ryanair plane circling before landing at Warsaw Modlin Airport, at the time that the airport, one of four, was reported to have been temporarily closed. Poland has been on high alert for objects entering its airspace since a stray Ukrainian missile struck a southern Polish village in 2022, killing 2 people, a few months into Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, but there have been no reports of Polish or Allied defense systems destroying drones. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk is meeting with ministers responsible for state security, and an extraordinary meeting of the Council of Ministers is set to be held on Wednesday.
Welcome back. Joining me now is Laurent Locaux, the founder of the Macro Butler. Laurent, welcome to the program.
Morning, Umar. It's always my pleasure to be on Turkey diplomacy.
Thank you, Laurent. Laurent, we all witnessed Israel's attack on the Hamas leadership in Doha. Tell me, how are these events influencing global oil prices, considering Qatar's role as a major LNG exporter?
Well, we have seen after this attack, oil prices bouncing back. I think that this could be another catalyst to trigger increasing geopolitical tension in the region. And of course, we know that historically, when there is geopolitical tension in the Middle East, this is a trigger for much higher oil prices. And I would put this into the perspective that for the time being, global oil demand is relatively weak. OPEC countries has raised production over the past few months. So to see a much higher oil price, we need a supply shock and, of course, a renewed war in the Middle East between Israel and Iran, or between Israel and other players in the Middle East could, of course, trigger a much higher oil price in the next few weeks and months.
Laurent, Japan's PM, Shigeru Ishiba, resigned on September the 7th after the LDP's electoral losses. Potential successors like Sanai Takaichi favor expansionary fiscal policies, whereas Shinjiro Koizumi maintains a more centrist approach. How are Japan's financial markets and economic policies being impacted at this point?
Well, Japan has been the epicenter of a lot of political uncertainty. After the few weeks ago election, the prime minister became a lame duck prime minister. So here, I think that the impact on financial markets first has been already a weaker yen. And we have continued to see long dated Japanese bond yield rising. And I think that in the next few weeks and months, we will continue to these trends to materialize even more. So I would think that the yen could weaken further, and we could see Japanese bond yield much higher. And for financial markets, I would think that this could trigger additional volatility on top of the geopolitical event in the Middle East, also what's happening between Ukraine and Russia, as well as renewed tariff tension between the US and some BRICS members like India and China.
Laurent, what are the strategic implications of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization's push for a development bank? We all saw how the summit was held and world leaders were there. President Putin was there. Many other world leaders were there. They revealed the idea at that summit in Tianjin. So what could it bring for member states like India, China, and Russia when we talk about countering Western financial institutions?
Well, I think that we should take a step back and look what is the SCO and what is the difference between SCO and BRICS. So BRICS historically has dealt more with economic issues, while SCO was originally founded to trigger more security and defense strategic issues. But if we look at the partners and the members of the BRICS and SCO, I mean, they are increasingly similar, and especially partners, especially from Southeast Asia and Middle East Asia. So I would think that at some point we could see the SCO and the BRICS merging together. In fact, Belarusian President Lukashenko a few months ago already kind of triggered this possibility that BRICS and SCO would merge, as SCO is also more and more about economy. And I would say the lesson of the latest summit of the SCO is that there was a big announcement of a new pipeline from Siberia into China. So this will clearly divert a lot of natural gas from Russia into China. And this is clearly in line with what the BRICS, what China has done with the One Belt, One Road initiative, is building roads and pipelines to be much more independent from the sea trade routes because the seas are still controlled mostly by the US, but the roads and pipelines are much more under the control of the BRICS nation, especially Russia and China. So, I mean, in a nutshell, if I would say and summarize in one sentence, I think that last week SCO clearly increased the cooperation between China, India, and Russia. And this is part of building this triumvirate, which is expected to dominate the world economically by the next decade.
Laurent, staying on the same subject, many experts have been saying that Russia is, siding with China. President Putin visited China for the SCO summit because now it's depending more on the Chinese. Do you think that's for financial reasons or political reasons?
I think it's both. Since Russia was put aside and is not able to trade anymore with the Western world and especially with Europe, I think that Russia has looked back at the East, and China is clearly the natural customer of Russia in terms of commodities, especially oil and gas. And I would think that Russia and China are very complementary because Russia is the country with the largest commodity resources in the world. China is a state-of-the-art manufacturer. So the combination of the two countries is quite a natural combination. And on top of this, during the BRICS summit, we have seen further development of the BRICS countries, Russia, China, as well as India and Brazil, building an alternative to SWIFT. So I would think that it's both economically and financially reasons that push Russia and China to increase to trade with each other.
Laurent, also India is a very key player, right, in the SCO. Now, a few weeks ago or a few months ago, we were seeing how the United States targeted China and India with tariffs. And then it removed those tariffs from China, but it increased the tariffs on India. So why are we seeing this relationship between India and the United States? Because in the beginning of the year, the US was strongly supporting India, but now that mood has changed.
If you look at the recent trend in terms of export from the BRICS countries or SCO countries to the US, in fact, all countries except to India until recently were decreasing the export to the US. So India was the last remaining major trade partner with the US among the SCO and BRICS countries. And I guess that's, the same mistake that the previous administration, which pushed China and Russia to trade even more between each other. This administration in the US is doing the same mistake, kind of pushing India into this combination of Russia and China. And I would think that if we take a longer time perspective, I come back to this. Russia as the largest supplier of commodities in the world. China remains the state-of-the-art manufacturer of the world. And India is expected to be the larger consumer market of the world by the next decade. So again, this combination, what I call the triumvirate, will probably dominate the world economically by the end of this decade or early of the next decade. And the implication would also be that the financial art of the world will most likely move out of New York, most likely into Hong Kong or Shanghai, when this triumvirate dominate the economic world.
Laurent, how are you monitoring the financial implications for European defense markets following Poland's unprecedented shoot-down of Russian drones in its airspace? How might this incident influence NATO's political cohesion and defense spending priorities?
Well, I guess that a few weeks ago, all European NATO members and even Canada have committed to move to spend 5% of their GDP into defense. Unfortunately, for most of these countries, especially European countries, they don't have really the money to spend on defense. So this will mean that they will need to increase their debt level to finance their defense spending. I would think that recent event in Poland could be a kind of a false flag, or will add to the geopolitical pressure. I mean, we have seen President Macron and other European leaders trying to send boots on the ground in Ukraine, which would be very, very dangerous in terms of the next step of escalation in the conflict between Ukraine and Russia.
Laurent, we're witnessing a chaotic situation in Nepal following Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli's resignation amid deadly anti-corruption protests. How could these protests impact foreign direct investment in the country, especially in its hydropower and tourism sectors? And what political challenges will the next government face in restoring economic confidence?
Well, I think that what we have seen in Nepal over the past few days is kind of what we have seen in many emerging markets across the world. They are raising social tensions. This is clearly not very positive in the short term for the economy, but I would think that I would put these events into the geopolitical perspective. And here we would need to see which government and who is coming into power in the next few days and weeks in Nepal. But this could be also another color revolution, which have been triggered by the CIA or other American agency, because we have to remember that Nepal and India have some border tension in the past. And again, this could be a way for the West and the US to try to restart this border tension between Nepal and India. And of course, this would be another attempt to destabilize India and the rest of the BRICS. So I would think that it would depend on who is coming into power in the next few days in Nepal. And in terms of the economic development of Nepal, probably this would put a stop from investment, especially from China and India, if the new government is not really in favor of collaborating with India and China.
Laurent, let's talk about what's going on in the United States. The Trump administration has intensified immigration raids in sanctuary cities such as Chicago and Boston. Now, these raids have directly affected local economies and financial markets, particularly industries like agriculture and construction. What political and financial backlash could this trigger?
Well, I think that we will have the CPI data for the month of August tonight. I would think that the impact is probably rising inflation. We will see inflation rising in terms of services, and this would probably impact inflation data in the next few months.
Laurent, thank you for that analysis. It was a pleasure having you on the program once again.
Thank you very much, Humar.
That brings us to the end of our program. Thanks for joining us. Bye for now.